He didn't ask for a second chance. He didn't ask for recognition. He only asked for one last goodbye. Michael Turner had never been the kind of man to show much emotion. He joined the military right out of high school, trading the soft safety of his small town for the hard, relentless machinery of war. He didn't mind. Structure suited him. Orders made sense. In a world full of chaos, a command was a life raft. Then came Raven. A Belgian Malinois, lean and sharp-eyed, with a coat the color of gunmetal and a mind like a loaded weapon. He wasn't Michael's first K9 partner, but he was different from the beginning. There was a sharpness to him, sure, but also something deeper. Something like loyalty welded so tightly into his bones that it felt more like instinct than training. They bonded faster than anyone expected. Raven learned Michael's voice before he learned all his commands. Michael learned Raven's moods before he fully trusted any of the other men in his unit. Together, they cleared paths through bomb-threatened villages. Together, they dragged wounded soldiers to safety. Together, they survived. There were missions that should have ended both their lives. The roadside bomb that missed them by inches. The sniper's bullet that would have found Michael's skull if Raven hadn't shoved him down at the last second. The long nights in freezing deserts where Michael curled his body around Raven's to share what little heat the earth refused to give. He owed the dog his life more times than he could count. He owed him more than that. He owed him everything. When Michael was finally discharged honorably but broken, he assumed Raven would come too. It didn't work like that. K9 units, even those bonded in blood and sweat, belonged to the military. Raven was reassigned. New handler. New orders. No goodbye. Michael returned home to civilian life with a limp in his right leg and a hollow place in his chest no medication could touch. The world felt slower here. Softer. But also emptier. He tried to fill his days with work. Tried to fill his nights with sleep. But every silence was too big. Every dream was too loud. For years, he carried the war inside him. And inside that war, always, was the dog he had lost. Then one night, sitting alone at the kitchen table with only the ticking clock for company, Michael opened a letter from an old friend still stationed overseas. The words were simple. Short. But they hit harder than any bullet he had ever faced. Raven's retiring. They're transferring him to civilian placement. Michael didn't think. Didn't hesitate. He packed a bag, booked a flight, and began the battle he never thought he would have to fight. To bring his dog home. It wasn't easy. Nothing about the system made it easy. The paperwork was dense. The requirements exhausting. Bureaucracy pressed against him like a wall of faceless hands, each one pushing him further from the dog he loved. Rules were rules, they said. Raven had been assigned elsewhere. There were procedures. Michael filed appeal after appeal. Request after request. He wasn't asking for charity. He wasn't asking for special treatment. He was asking to bring home the partner who had carried him through hell. Weeks stretched into months. And finally, the decision was set for a court hearing. Michael wasn't naive. He knew the law. K9s were classified as equipment. Even after years of service. Even after bleeding beside him. But he also knew something deeper, something no form or legal code could erase. Raven was not a tool. He was not a piece of property. He was family. In the days leading up to the court date, Michael prepared himself for the worst. He polished his shoes. Pressed his jacket. Wrote a statement he knew he might never get to read aloud. He wasn't fighting for a victory. He was fighting for a goodbye. One last chance to see Raven, to thank him, to look into those dark, steady eyes and let him know that none of it, none of the sacrifices, none of the long nights, none of the bleeding or waiting or surviving had ever been forgotten. The morning of the hearing, Michael stood outside the courthouse alone. No family. No press. No crowd. Just him and a small folded photo in his pocket, an old snapshot of a younger man and a younger dog sitting in the dust somewhere halfway across the world, smiling like they had already won. He touched the photo once for luck, then walked inside. The moment Michael stepped into the courtroom, he felt it. The heavy silence. The way people turned to look, then quickly looked away. He was used to that. Soldiers who came back different always got that look. But he wasn't here for them. He was here for Raven. The judge entered with a soft rustle of robes, a woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and a reputation for strict adherence to procedure. Michael stood when told, sat when told, folded his hands carefully on the table in front of him. His palms were sweating. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt nervous. The government representative made the first arguments, polite, professional, emotionless. They explained that Raven had been classified as decommissioned equipment, that he had been assigned for reassignment, That emotional bonds, while understandable, could not override official protocol. Michael barely heard them. He was staring at the side door, the one where Raven would come through, if they let him. The judge nodded along as the government representative spoke, her face unreadable. Finally, she turned to Michael. "Sergeant Turner," she said, voice firm but not unkind. "You've requested an audience with the animal in question." "Why?" Michael stood. His throat felt tight. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the photo. Held it up. "This is us," he said. The courtroom projector clicked on and the image flashed onto the screen above the judge's bench. A dusty road. A tired young man, barely out of his teens, crouching beside a young dog with bright eyes and tattered ears. Both smiling. Both alive. "He's not equipment to me," Michael said. "He's not a number. He's not a tool." He looked down, gathering his breath, then raised his eyes again. "He's my partner. He's my brother." Silence stretched heavy across the room. The judge tapped her pen lightly against her folder. "Very well," she said. She nodded to the bailiff. "Bring him in." Michael turned. The door creaked open. And there he was. Raven. Older now. Grayer around the muzzle. But unmistakably, heartbreakingly Raven. The handler holding his leash tried to keep him steady, but Raven was already straining forward, muscles taut, eyes locked onto one person. Michael. There was no hesitation. No confusion. In that instant, whatever years had passed, whatever distance had been forced between them, collapsed like smoke. Michael dropped to one knee. He didn't call Raven's name. He didn't have to. The dog broke free from the handler with a sharp pull and bolted across the room. Chairs scraped back. People gasped. But no one stopped him. Raven barreled into Michael's arms with a force that nearly knocked him backward. The dog whined, cried, pressed his entire body against Michael's chest, tail whipping like a storm, paws clawing at his shoulders. Michael buried his face into Raven's fur and held on. Held on like a man pulled from drowning. He could feel it, every beat of Raven's heart against his own. The courtroom blurred at the edges. The only thing real was this. Finally, after what felt like forever, Michael pulled back slightly, hands framing Raven's grizzled face. "You remember," he whispered, voice breaking. Raven licked his cheek, low whining never stopping. The judge cleared her throat. The room shifted. Michael rose slowly, hand on Raven's back, facing the bench. "I wasn't asking for mercy," he said, voice rough. "I just wanted to say goodbye. Because he deserves that. After everything he gave." The judge stared at them for a long moment. Everyone waited. The room held its breath. Finally, the judge set down her pen. She leaned forward and said quietly, "I don't believe you two should ever be separated again." Michael blinked, not daring to move. Effective immediately, the judge continued, "Raven will be officially released into your custody, Sergeant Turner. No further conditions." The words hung there. Michael's knees nearly gave out. A cheer rose from somewhere in the back of the room, a courtroom clerk, maybe, or someone who couldn't hold back. The judge didn't gavel it down. She just smiled. Michael knelt again, hugging Raven tighter, as if afraid it wasn't real. But it was. The war hadn't broken them. The time apart hadn't erased them. They were home. Finally. Together. And no piece of paper could ever undo what had been forged in blood, sweat, and love on battlefields no one would ever see. When Michael left the courthouse that day, he didn't walk alone. Raven trotted beside him, leash loose, head high, ears pricked forward like he owned the world. Maybe he did. Maybe they both did. Because sometimes the battles that matter most aren't fought with bullets or medals. They're fought with the heart. And this time, they had one. The first night home was quiet. No celebrations. No noise. No visitors. Just Michael and Raven back where they belonged. Michael opened the door to the small house he'd bought after leaving the service, simple, sturdy, built more for survival than comfort. The floors creaked. The walls still smelled faintly of sawdust and varnish. It wasn't much. But to Michael, it was home. And for the first time in years, it felt complete. Raven padded through the house carefully at first, sniffing, exploring, cataloging every inch like a soldier clearing a new base. Michael let him. He leaned against the doorframe and just watched, hardly believing it was real. Raven stopped in the living room, staring at the fireplace where Michael had hung a single framed photo, the same one he had shown the judge. Michael walked over and crouched beside him. "That's us," he said quietly. Raven let out a soft huff and nudged Michael's hand with his nose, as if to say, "I know." Later, Michael made dinner, simple beef and rice, and set a bowl down beside the kitchen table. Raven ate slowly, methodically, glancing up between bites to make sure Michael was still there. When the plates were cleared and the house had settled into nighttime stillness, Michael found himself hesitating by the couch. Raven sat at his feet, staring up at him. The bed was upstairs. The couch was here. Michael sat. Raven immediately curled up beside him, head pressed against Michael's thigh, heavy and warm and real. It wasn't long before Michael drifted into a sleep deeper than he'd known in years. No nightmares that night, just the soft rhythm of Raven's breathing. When morning came, Michael opened his eyes to find Raven still there, still watching him. They went for a walk before sunrise, down the cracked sidewalks of their sleepy town, past closed shops and darkened windows. Raven kept pace with him perfectly, no leash needed. He didn't bark at passing cats. He didn't chase after squirrels. He walked where Michael walked, stopped when Michael stopped, turned when Michael turned. Just like they used to. Word spread quickly. The town wasn't big, and people knew a good story when they heard one. First it was the barista at the corner cafe. Then the woman at the post office. Then the old man who ran the hardware store. Everyone wanted to meet Raven, to hear about the courtroom, to hear about the reunion. Michael didn't mind. He told the story in bits and pieces, never more than a few sentences at a time. It wasn't something he could explain easily. How do you explain a bond built in foxholes and firefights? How do you explain why a dog mattered more than medals or promotions or even survival? You didn't. You just lived it. And so he did. Every morning they walked. Every afternoon they sat by the lake at the edge of town. Raven's head resting on Michael's knee, the water sparkling in front of them. Every evening, Michael would find himself talking to Raven without realizing it. Telling him about his day, about the news, about nothing at all. And Raven listened. Always. One afternoon, sitting by the lake, Michael found himself tracing the scars on his arm. Small, pale lines left by shrapnel and knives and broken glass. Marks of battles he'd fought and won. But somehow, the biggest mark was invisible, the place where Raven had filled the hollow left behind. "You saved me," Michael said quietly, running a hand over Raven's thick fur. Raven lifted his head and thumped his tail once against the ground. It wasn't long after that Michael got the idea. A small patch of land near the lake had been sitting abandoned for years. Just a sloping meadow, half-choked with weeds. Michael bought it and built a park. Not a big one, just a simple fenced space with soft grass and a few benches, a water fountain for dogs and a shaded pavilion for people. He named it Raven's Rest, a place for dogs to run, a place for soldiers to sit, a place for anyone who knew what it meant to lose something and to find it again. On the opening day, the whole town came. Families with children, veterans in faded jackets, mothers and grandfathers and teenagers who just wanted to see the dog who had become something of a legend. Michael stood at the gate, Raven at his side, and watched as life poured into the place they had made together. He didn't give a speech. He didn't need to. When the mayor tried to hand him a microphone, Michael just shook his head, smiled, and said, "This place isn't for talking. It's for remembering." Raven spent the afternoon chasing tennis balls and accepting scratches from strangers who quickly became friends. Michael watched him, heart full to the brim. And for the first time since the day he left the battlefield behind, he realized he wasn't fighting anymore. He was living. He was free. Because the war had ended not when the gunfire stopped, not when the medals were pinned, not even when the courtroom doors had opened. The war ended when two broken soldiers found each other again, and chose not just to survive, but to heal. The seasons changed around them. Spring turned into summer, then bled into fall. Leaves drifted across the sidewalks, golden and red. Kids wore jackets again. The lake grew colder, its waters turning a deeper shade of blue. And through it all, Michael and Raven remained side by side. Some days were slower now. Raven was getting older. The runs at the park turned into walks. The leaps for tennis balls grew shorter, the naps in the sun longer. Michael saw it happening little by little. The graying around Raven's muzzle, the stiffness in his back legs, the way he sometimes paused at the bottom of the porch steps, gathering himself before climbing. But Raven still wagged his tail the same way. Still greeted Michael every morning as if no day could ever be bad if they started it together. Michael adjusted their routines. Shorter walks. Softer beds. He built a ramp by the porch so Raven didn't have to jump. People in town noticed, too. Visitors to Raven's rest left gentler toys by the gate now, plush balls instead of hard rubber ones. Someone hand-sewed a giant pillow and embroidered it with Raven's name. Everywhere he went, Raven was met with kindness, with the soft acknowledgement that he had already given enough. He didn't have to prove anything anymore. Neither of them did. One afternoon in late October, Michael and Raven sat at their usual spot by the lake. The sky was the pale gray of approaching winter. The air was crisp but not yet cruel. Michael threw a ball half-heartedly into the grass, and Raven trotted after it at his own pace, picking it up and carrying it back with the slow dignity of an old warrior. Michael laughed. Raven dropped the ball at his feet, then lay down with a long sigh. Michael scratched behind his ears. "Good job, buddy," he said. Raven thumped his tail once against the dirt. They sat like that for a long time. As the sun dipped lower, painting the world in long, soft shadows, Michael found himself talking. Not about the war. Not about the court hearing. Just about life. The way Raven would cock his head when Michael opened a jar of peanut butter. The way he barked exactly once every morning at the mailman like a ritual. The way he always chose to nap on Michael's side of the bed even when the whole mattress was free. Raven listened, his eyes half-closed, ears twitching at Michael's voice. Michael didn't notice the tears until they were already sliding down his face. He wiped them away quickly, chuckling under his breath. "Damn it, you're gonna make me soft," he said. Raven didn't move. Just pressed his head against Michael's knee. It was then that Michael realized something he hadn't allowed himself to think before. Their time was running out. Not today. Not tomorrow. But soon. And that was okay. Because they had already been given more than most ever got. A second chance. A homecoming. A future together. When the first snow came, light and tentative, Michael opened the back door and let Raven step out onto the dusted porch. The old dog sniffed the air. Tasted it. Then wagged his tail once, slowly, and padded down the ramp. He didn't run. Didn't roll in the snow like he used to. He simply walked across the yard, leaving a trail of perfect paw prints in the soft powder. Michael followed, not trying to catch up. Just walking behind him. The way Raven had followed him once, so many years ago, across battlefields and deserts. Following. Protecting. Trusting. At the far edge of the yard, Raven stopped and looked back. Michael met his gaze. No words. No commands. Just understanding. They turned back together. Walked slowly toward the house. Step for step. Side by side. When spring came again, Michael planted a tree in the center of Raven's Rest. An oak sapling. Sturdy. Resilient. He placed a small plaque at its base. It didn't mention wars or ranks or battles fought. It didn't list medals or years. It simply said, "For Raven who came home." Visitors asked sometimes about the dog in the photographs. The stories trickled through the town, whispered with reverence and warmth. About the soldier who fought a war he couldn't explain. About the dog who never gave up on him. About how healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks quietly beside you, soft-footed and steady, through the hardest parts of your life. And if you are lucky enough, you get to walk all the way back.